Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining today's program, Understanding Emotional Intelligence at the Workplace and Beyond. This broadcast today is part of our Career Lunch and Learn series. My name is Erin Hollis, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Outreach here at the MIT Alumni Association, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today. Our webinar, as a reminder, is being broadcast live. Throughout the program, you may submit your questions using the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar. If you don't automatically see your toolbar, simply drag your mouse across the edges of your screen until it reappears. We will also be using a polling feature for today's webcast. When you see the poll pop up on your screen, simply select your answer and hit submit. For all our listeners joining via YouTube, you may add your questions to the comments field, and you may tweet your comments and questions using hashtag #MITBetterWorld. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Ellen Wolf. Ellen, welcome.
Thank you, Erin.
Ellen has been an engineer, systems thinker, and energy policy advocate. She applies emotional intelligence and mindfulness practices, helping her clients bring their full capacities as human beings and leaders to work and home. Ellen loves to bring new techniques and perspectives to technical environments to enhance one's field and depth of view, resulting in breakthrough levels on effectiveness and one's quality of experience. He is a certified Search Inside Yourself instructor and delights in leading workshops and working directly with both individuals and organizations. Ellen has her Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from UC Davis and a master's degree in Technology and Policy and Management from MIT. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Ellen. Ellen, thanks again for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks. So thanks for the nice introduction. I'll introduce myself a little bit more in a minute. But first, let's just take a minute. I hope you can see my screen now, and Erin can tell me if you can't.
Looks great.
But, you know, if in the workplace you probably have this experience where you go to a meeting and you just came out of something else and you rushed to the meeting, and this webinar is a little bit like that. You probably were doing lots of things before it started. You might have things to do in the afternoon. So let's just take a minute to settle in, you know, to enjoy actually being here in this moment right now. So probably you're sitting, maybe you're standing, but you can feel the seat that you're sitting on and feel the environment. Maybe it's a little cool or warm where you are? And just start to notice what it's like to be here in this moment. Maybe take a deep breath in and then let it go. And notice you hear my voice, maybe there are other sounds, maybe other distractions in your field of view or in your listening. Just take a minute and notice your breath and the experience of being here right now. Great, yeah, thanks. So thanks for doing that. It helps me at least to settle in. And in fact, let's see if I can figure out how to move these slides now. Okay, so in fact, that's our first tool. And you can do this in your life when you are transitioning to something. It's particularly helpful in meetings, I find, but also can be helpful when you're transitioning from your work life to your home life. It's just taking a moment to arrive in that new setting. And as I mentioned, sometimes, especially in meetings, people are racing to and from, and they're not actually there with their attention. So one of the really nice things I like is this moment to arrive. So now that we've arrived, I'll tell you a little bit more of the backstory of me and how I got here. As Erin said, I started out as an engineer. What I loved about engineering was being able to really solve problems for people. And I got out of engineering school and started working on problems in the energy industry. And I was fascinated by that, but also kind of frustrated about how organizations and societies address these problems. And so then I decided to go off and learn more and went to MIT, to the Sloan School, and then also did the technology and policy program. And I was excited then to go back into the world and start solving bigger problems. So I did. I worked on problems around nuclear safety and the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and global warming. But what I found is I started getting a little frustrated that I just didn't seem to be having the impact that I wanted to have. And then at the same time, I kind of noticed my family life just didn't feel like it was gelling all that well too. You know, my marriage was kind of, and trying to raise a child. And it just all of a sudden occurred to me, like, who the heck do I think I am to go solve these world problems when I can't even take care of my own life? So that's when I started exploring different mindfulness practices, meditation and other things. And I loved the way that it started allowing me to actually get out of my head and realize there was more to me than my brain, which was a novel idea to me, having spent all those years learning stuff. And then after that, I found this program, Search Inside Yourself, that I think is just phenomenal. It was a program that was started at Google by an engineer. So for logical thinkers, it's a fantastic program to bring these kind of ancient practices like mindfulness and emotional intelligence, things that have been around for a long time, but deliver it in a way that for very effective, smart people, you can pick it up in just a day or two, or with some simple things that you can integrate into your life. So that's what I'm really happy to be doing now. I still have an energy consulting practice, but I work with really top-notch people and help them try to figure out how to solve the problems that they have in their work and their life by really accessing more of themselves. It really has created a magic for myself and those that I work with. So I'm excited to be here today and share that with you. So I wanted to offer, in particular, one ground rule. You know, these webinars are fun because you can experience things that you couldn't do in your office or your living room, but it's also very tempting to want to multitask. You know, check your phone, check your email, eat your lunch. Of course, if it's lunchtime and you're hungry, eat your lunch, of course. But I'm going to invite you to just take this time and just be present to this opportunity you've chosen, to just give yourself the gift of your presence and only having to do one thing at a time. So if you can put away the things that you don't absolutely have to do in the next hour and just enjoy this, that's my invitation as a ground rule. So first question, why emotional intelligence? Well, do any of you ever feel like this when you wake up in the morning and get to your desk, or on Monday morning? It's like it's not always easy, right? What we're facing these days. In fact, there's a phrase that's starting to be used more popularly in the business world and elsewhere, and it comes from a military application. And and this was how they first described the battlefield in military operations, that it's volatile, it's uncertain what's going to happen, it's complex, and the information that you're receiving is ambiguous. So VUCA is the acronym that's used to explain this. And this is more and more what our lives are like. You know, our workplace is more like this. The work, especially here that we do in the US these days, it's not simple anymore. We've kept the most complicated, unknown, leading edge problems to work on. And it makes this kind of quality to the things that we face in our lives. So the question is, how equipped do you feel to attend to this sort of environment? And this is an opportunity where we get to use the technology, and Erin has some polls now to get your feedback on how you feel enabled to deal with this sort of environment.
Okay, let me just launch the first poll here. Okay, so everyone tuning in should see a poll on their screen. I see some responses coming in. Take a minute for everyone to cast their vote. And Ellen, can you see the poll on your screen as well?
I can just see the question, but I can't see the answers. So
okay.
I'm curious. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for the answers like everybody else.
All right. A couple people are still voting here, so I'm just going to give it a moment. Okay. We'll share the results. Ellen, are you able to view that?
Oh yeah, so let's see, the majority of you, between 50 and 25% of the day, and I don't know what the orange means. Maybe that's the winner by a narrow margin.
Yes, by 1%.
Okay, but it follows kind of a bell curve, which is not surprising, but people tend to find their mind wandering on the order of maybe 37%, or some people 75% of the time. And we won't tell who you are, so don't worry, you can be honest in these things. But short answer, a lot of us, a lot of the time, our mind is wandering.
Should we go to the next poll?
Yeah, please.
All right. Okay. All right, so the second poll is launched if you want to cast your vote.
Maybe MIT alums go to the kind of meetings where you're engaged a lot, so maybe we'll be surprised. But
all right, so I'm going to end the poll now so we can see our results. Okay, Ellen, are you able to view those?
Yeah, it's about the same actually. So we're not more distracted. This group is not necessarily more distracted in meetings than they are all the time. But yeah, still, it's difficult. It probably takes more energy to stay engaged during meetings.
And we have 3% of our viewers have stellar attention skills.
That's great. Reach out to me afterwards. I'd like to get to know you.
Yes. Okay, we have one more poll before we move on. Okay. Let's give it another moment here.
This is a self-selected group because they're making time to enhance your personal productivity. So you can't just answer based on this hour though.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Oh, people are still voting. Okay. There are the results.
Yeah, so some of you do, which is great. Obviously, all of you do spend some time trying to enhance your productivity or otherwise enhance the quality of your life, or you wouldn't be here doing this webinar. But still, a lot of the time, we don't take the care maybe that we should take to help ourselves grow and develop, or approach the world in a way that makes life easier. So interesting. And that's typical actually in a study that was done recently where people had an app and they recorded how they were doing and what they were doing. On average, only 2% of the people regularly took time to take care of themselves. So this is a nice group and you're doing that more than average, but a lot of people have these situations in their life and yet don't really do a lot about it. So that's why emotional intelligence, I think, can be helpful. So thanks for your feedback. So what do we do about it? And that's why this is one area where emotional intelligence, I think, can be very helpful at supporting us in this kind of environment. So let me talk a little bit about it. What is emotional intelligence? This is kind of a simple definition from two of the earliest researchers in the field of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions and to discriminate among them and to use that information to guide one's thinking and actions. And what's key here that I wanted to point out is this concept of monitoring or being aware of. And I'll talk a bit more about what I've learned is really key to the whole emotional intelligence category or field. It's this awareness that underlies it all. Daniel Goleman wrote a really famous book, Emotional Intelligence, and one of the services that he did to the field was he identified these 5 disciplines. And they are self-awareness, which is being aware of one's own internal states, preferences, resources, and intuitions. Self-management, the ability to manage one's own states, preferences, resources, and intuitions. Motivation, which is using your own emotional tendencies or inner tendencies to guide you to completion of a goal, something that's interesting and important to you. Empathy, the ability to connect with others by seeing similarities and sharing kindness. And then social skills, and I like to think of social skills more in the realm of leadership, so how we lead others to do things that we believe are important. And to talk a little bit about why this is important and how it connects, I'll mention some benefits, some areas of benefits. And it's really kind of the focus of this webinar is, okay, there's this field of emotional intelligence, but why is it important? Well, it's interesting. Emotional intelligence has been found to be very important for leadership. In fact, researchers Jack Zenger and Joseph Folkman reported on in a Harvard Business Review article about this data set of over 300,000 responses from leaders, managers, and workforce employees about what makes a good leader. And it's interesting, of the top 8 of the factors reported, only 2 of them, and I've noted them, have to do with intelligence. And the rest of them all have to do with emotional intelligence. So it's fascinating, especially all of us that went through MIT, you know, we work so hard on our intellect and how to think. But at the end of the day, what matters most in leadership are these other qualities. And while, you know, it's important to be smart, it's kind of like now it's kind of a baseline, and leaders don't really excel until they have also these other qualities. And just workplace performance in general, Daniel Goleman wrote another book that I've pictured here, Working with Emotional Intelligence, and he reports on several studies that correlate workplace performance with emotional intelligence. And this one quote, twice as often, actually, 67% of the time, or in this study, 2 out of 3 of the abilities sought to distinguish the best performance were emotional intelligence competencies. So just in terms of the workforce in general. And then, of course, happiness. There was a book written by a professor from the University of California at Riverside, Sonia Lyubomirsky, and she wrote a book, The How of Happiness, where she had done a bunch of research about what does and what does not make people happy. And of all the factors that she listed in terms of what tends to make people happy, none of them have to do with intelligence. They all have to do with emotional intelligence. So, you know, these things can really have a big difference on our lives, and yet historically we haven't spent that much time necessarily nurturing them. Okay, so just a little bit about the how. I was going to talk about 2 of the disciplines a little bit. One is considered the key capacity for emotional intelligence, and it really supports the other capacities, and that's self-awareness. So what is self-awareness? And this is kind of a cute little picture where the mirror doesn't necessarily reflect what's actually looking in the mirror. And sometimes for me, the picture is the other way around. You know, like when I have to give a webinar or something, I look in the mirror and I sometimes feel a little bit smaller than I actually am. Daniel Goleman describes self-awareness as knowing one's own internal states, preferences, resources, and intuitions. But he's not talking just about a superficial knowing. He's really talking about a deep understanding about who we are as human beings. And this graphic, I like it. It's kind of a way to get a feel for what this refers to. So it's nice sometimes to have a little dialogue about the difference between the left image and the right image, but just think for yourself, what are some of the qualities of the differences in the picture? You know, you might use words like focus or one's more clear or vivid or bright, or the contrast is more profound. But self-awareness is like, I like to think of it as sort of giving us a high precision sense of who we are as human beings. You know, all that stuff's going on inside of us, but if we're not clear about what it is, then we really lose a lot of information. So I wanted to talk about a couple of studies to just try to illustrate a little bit some aspects of self-awareness. And this one had to do with the quality of self-awareness that's emotional awareness. And there was a study done in Finland, and what they did in the study is they took subjects and they put them in front of a computer terminal, and then they showed them images that evoked certain emotional experiences for them, like a picture of something sad or a picture of something that where somebody's angry. And they asked the participants to color in silhouettes, and they either colored in like red or bright colors for the parts of the body that they thought were activated, or they colored in blue the parts of the bodies that they thought were deactivated by the emotion. And then they took these responses and correlated them across hundreds of participants. And this is the result. And what they found is there was a high level of correlation across people's responses. And then this study was actually repeated again in other parts of Europe and then also in Asia, and they found consistent correlation. And really the implication of this is, or the message is that these emotions in our body exist in particular locations in particular ways. And they convey this physiologically, they convey information that can be useful to us. And if we start to pay attention to how our body is and how the emotions manifest physiologically, we can get a lot of information about that. And that information can help guide our decision making in both the workplace and at home. So it can be very useful. And if we don't pay attention to it, we miss out on all of that. So another study I like that's really fascinating, and it was really impactful for me, and especially when I started learning about this material. And this study is called the Iowa Gambling Study, or the Iowa Gambling Task. It was a research project that was done at the University of Iowa. And in this research task, they used students as subjects, and they offered them real money if they excelled at this task. And in this task, they were brought into a room, and there were 4 decks of cards on a table, 2 blue decks and 2 red decks. And the subjects had to turn over cards on the decks, sort of, they chose in a sense randomly. And high cards like aces, kings, and queens were worth positive value, and low cards like 2s, 3s, and 4s were negative. And the higher the result they got, the more real money they got. So the students started flipping over these decks. And what the students weren't told is that the red decks were rigged. So the red decks had high cards, they had good cards, but they had more of these bad cards, more loser cards. So here's what they found, is that after 50 flips of the cards, the students had a hunch that something was up with the decks. And after 80 flips of the cards, the students had figured out that the red decks were loser decks, and they should just turn over cards from the blue decks if they wanted to win. Now, the really interesting thing about this study, and something I didn't tell you, is that they also hooked the students up to lie detector tests. Sensors that felt the perspiration on their palms. And in our palms, we perspirate when we're nervous or kind of stressed out, anxious. And so the really fascinating thing about this is that after only 10 flips of the cards, the students measured a response on these lie detector tests, and their behavior changed. So, I mean, just think about this for a minute. The students hadn't really figured it out. Like if you were assigned a job, your boss told you, tell me when, write a report about why the blue decks are better, or what to do. You would have waited until you would have turned over 80 of these cards maybe, because that's when you really had the logical evidence of what was going on. But after only 10 flips of the cards, these students knew something was up and they started changing their behavior, only their brain hadn't caught up yet. See, so if we can start to use this information that our body gives us, we can really get a lot of information about what's going on, and we can incorporate it into our decision making and make much better decisions. I think fascinating. And this is really the subject matter of Search Inside Yourself. So this program that I mentioned, from which some of these materials are taken, it couples the fact that there's this whole field, emotional intelligence, developed by Salvia Meyer, Daniel Goleman, and others. And then it adds the benefit that we've gotten over the last decade or so in neuroscience, and the recognition that an awareness, an element of awareness, is really important to this. So these 3 things together are really, I think, quite powerful, and that's what this program, Search Inside Yourself, has really packaged. So, and I mentioned the research, with the advent of magnetic resonance imaging, there's really been a lot of work done about the brain and what's going on in the brain when we do different activities. So there's a lot of research about the impacts of mindfulness in terms of changes in behavior, changes in preferences, changes in resilience. And I won't talk a lot more about the science behind it, but it's really fascinating. But some qualities of the science, most of this science has to do with neuroplasticity. So it's the quality of the brain, which again, something we've just figured out in the last decade or so, that the brain actually is malleable and it grows and changes based on what we say and do and think. So we can undertake activities to grow our brains in certain ways that we might like to change the experience in our life and our effectiveness. And so emotional intelligence and mindfulness really bring in this quality of neuroplasticity to help us do these things. So just, I don't know if we have any brain scientists on the webinar. We might find out if they're brain scientists, but this is my cartoony understanding of how the brain works. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about brain science because it sort of captures the great opportunity that we have in these emotional intelligence practices and mindfulness practices. So in early man, there was this part of the brain called the amygdala. It's part of the salience network or the emotional valence of the brain. And it's been there for a long time. And it's the part of the brain they refers to as like fight or flight, the kind that reacts really quickly, the part that stress comes from and fear comes from. And it's a fantastic part of our brain because first, it's allowed us to survive this long, but also it's really quick acting. It's the thing that senses things really fast. Uh-oh, danger, something's up. So we get that part of our brain. And then there's the prefrontal cortex that came later on in the development of the human brain. And it's really the logical center. And it's the one that I worked on in engineering school and at MIT. And what's fascinating is that these two parts of the brain talk to one another. You know, I used to think, okay, they're logical thinkers and then they're emotional people. And I'm not one of those artsy emotional people. I want to be one of the logical thinkers so I can be rational. But in reality, we all have both parts of our brain. And the real magic happens when these parts of the brain talk to one another. And by being aware and starting to notice and doing certain practices, we can enhance the communication channel between these parts of our brain. And this is where a lot of creativity lies, the development of intuition, which is really a kind of a leading edge area that's being developed in all sorts of businesses, for example, financial industries, technology, to really grow this part of our capacity. So this is where a lot of the emotional intelligence happens. So mindfulness is part of what underlies this capacity of self-awareness, because if we're not paying attention, we can't be aware of what's going on in our body, and we can't use that information. So starting to just develop more capacity around mindfulness can be very helpful in emotional intelligence. And the interesting thing about mindfulness, there have been practices for years and years and years about mindfulness meditation and so forth, but with the understanding of neuroplasticity, there's a recognition that mindfulness is just another way of exercising part of our body to grow a capacity that we didn't have before, kind of like going to the gym and doing reps with a barbell to develop bicep muscle. Now we're working on other neuroplasticity channels in our brain. So here's your little mini opportunity to learn about mindfulness practices. One of the main mindfulness practices is a focused attention practice, being able to pay attention to something for an extended period of time. And you know, we did the poll in the beginning about mind wandering. A lot of us spend a lot of our time mind wandering. And by practicing attention intently, we can develop the capacity to keep on task, pay attention more, be more aware. So the way this goes is, for example, you might be asked, so just follow your breath, pay attention to your breath, and you try to do that, but then what happens? You think about that you're hungry, you know, you're looking forward to dinner or lunch. And so you get distracted. And then you get distracted, and hopefully, if you're committed to this practice of attention, you might notice that you got distracted. And when you notice that you got distracted, then you have the opportunity to reorient your attention. And of course, this goes around and around and around if you're spending a minute trying to be focused. But what I think is fantastic about the fact that this cycle exists is that it's not being able to pay attention to your breath where the growth lies. The growth lies in noticing the distraction and then reorienting back to the focus. that grows the part of the brain that's really responsible for the focus. So in other words, you can be really bad at this and still be benefiting. So this is a little mini explanation of what a mindfulness practice might look like. So we're going to try this now. So you know when we started, if you signed on in the very beginning, we did just a moment to arrive. We're going to just take a couple minutes and do a little mindful breathing exercise. So if you have stuff in your hands, you might set it down. And if you're sitting in a chair, maybe sit up a little bit more so you have kind of an alert posture. Or if you're standing, pay attention to your posture a little bit. And you want to be alert, but not real tight. So alert, but relaxed. And then just begin to notice your breath. Maybe take a deep breath in, let it go. And just begin to notice your breaths. The in-breath, the experience of the air going through your nostrils and into your abdomen. And then the out-breath. You might notice the experience of yourself on the seat, your feet on the floor. And a thought might arise or something else that distracts you, and you can just bring your attention back to your breath. Just take a few more breath cycles now and just notice your breath. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that exercise, for your attention, maybe trying something new. I think we had another poll, didn't we, Erin? That's our last poll.
Yeah, I just launched that if folks want to respond, and you can select multiple answers for this one. Okay, we have 500 votes so far.
Oh my goodness.
In. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Share the results.
That's interesting. So some people that did notice that they're a little more relaxed or more aware. If you notice sensations that maybe they weren't aware of. Some people thought that it was easier than they might have expected, and some people found it was more difficult. Yeah. So you can notice what it's like to notice. Interesting. It can be interesting as well. Yeah, thanks for that. I like these little mini versions because, of course, there are meditators that could spend an hour meditating, you know, or maybe people that decide to spend 10 minutes in the morning as a dedicated practice, just like you might spend 20 minutes going for a jog or something. But then you can also integrate these awareness practices into your life in a very quick, easy way. So I like this little 3-breath practice, and let's try it now. So you're going to take 3 breaths, and in the first breath, just pay attention to your breath. The second breath, use the breath, especially the out breath, to try to relax the body. And then the third breath, ask yourself, is there something, especially look in your gut, maybe your heart, what's really important to you right now? What's important for you for the rest of the day? It's just a little quick way to sort of settle yourself, relax your body, and then pay attention to what's important. So a little micro practice you can do, really integrated into your life. So we have a few practices now: a minute to arrive, that it's great before a meeting, a mindful breathing that you can do in your day if you choose to, and then this integrated 3 breath practice that you can do pretty much anywhere, before a meeting, before an important phone call, before you go home at night. So there's our little toolkit so far. You can see how there's many things that can help. All these will help support emotional intelligence. So I know we wanted to spend some time with some Q&A, but I wanted to just touch briefly on another capacity because, well, I'll tell you why in a minute, but empathy. Kind of a cute little picture, but empathy can be really important in our family and personal relationships, but it also can be really important on the job. And in fact, Google did a study. They set their best statisticians and social scientists out to tackle the question, kind of an easy question, but it was one for which the answer was a bit evasive. What makes a good team? And they looked at all the things you might expect, like how cohesive was the team, or whether the diversity of the team mattered, and whether the leader was authoritarian or more distributed decision making, all these different things. And none of them had any strong correlation with the success of the team. And the thing they landed on that was relevant was something that was more of an unwritten norm, and it had to do with psychological safety. So here are the findings. They found the most important thing to the success of the team was the experience of psychological safety. Whether people felt safe to speak up, whether people were afraid that they might be put down, or people felt trusted or trusted others. And other things were important too, like the dependability of the others on the team, whether the team structure was clear, whether the meaning was something they cared about, and the impact was profound. But by far, the psychological safety was important. So by having an empathetic relationship with others that you work with, you develop this experience of psychological safety among those with whom you relate. So this is a definition that I like about empathy, because sometimes we can have kind of strange understandings of what it is. And it's really just the ability to experience and understand what others feel while maintaining a clear discernment about your perspective and the other person's perspective. So in this second part, it's pretty important, because if you don't be clear about what somebody else is feeling and what you're feeling, then you can be overly impacted. And there's a phrase it's called emotional contagion. If you spend a lot of time around somebody that's having a really hard time, for example, it's easy to feel weighted down. And what's fascinating about is that as you grow the capacity to be empathetic, you also grow the capacity to discern. So you build your own resilience and the ability to be around others when others are having a hard time, for example, without yourself being dragged down. What empathy isn't, it's not psychologizing. So like if you ever have a friend that's suffering and you say, well, I think you're suffering because of X, Y, and Z, it never helps to try to psychologize with people or find underlying reasons for why they're feeling. But it's also not necessarily agreeing with people. So Aristotle said something like, it's the mark of a great mind to be able to entertain a thought without agreeing with it. So you don't have to buy into somebody else's position to be empathetic with them. And in fact, it can be very useful to making difficult decisions in a team setting, for example, to be empathetic, because others feel like they trust you and that your intention is for the greater good, even if they don't necessarily agree with your choice. So it doesn't mean that you have to, it's an either or thing. You can still have your own position and be an empathetic person. Now, here's what's fascinating about this whole thing, I think, and what the beauty of it is that our brains are hardwired to be empathetic. And again, the science in the last 10 years or so has proven this, that we have what would have been referred to as mirror neurons, and in my experience, mirrors that of which I observe in another person. So there's really not anything you have to do to train in being empathetic, except to be more aware of your own experience. By doing those practices to become more aware and to become more aware of your own experience, you naturally will become more empathetic. So really, it's not hard. There are some practices that people do engage in to enhance their ability to be empathetic, and one is seeing similarities with others. And I won't go into the whole research behind this, But to the extent that we see similarities in other people, even if it's just on the level of basic human condition, we will naturally be more empathetic. And then kindness also is sort of the engine of empathy. So offering kindness to somebody. And this you can do in a very simple way too. So it's going to give you one more tool for your toolkit. And it's a set of practices that Search Inside Yourself calls Shift to Connection. And this is another 3-breath practice. And with the first breath, again, you just sort of settle yourself and collect yourself. But the second breath, you see a similarity with somebody. You know, maybe you're in the grocery store line and the person there looks tired and you think they're probably looking forward to getting home to their family too. Or you go into a meeting room and you say, oh, there's Joe. He probably wants this meeting to be successful also. And then the third breath, you offer them some kindness. May they be well. May they be successful. You know, may they get home to their family in due time. And so let's just try this. Picture somebody in your mind that you've come across today, or maybe you're thinking of, and use that person as your practice object in this. So just take a breath, settle the mind. And a second breath to think of a similarity with that person. And then a third breath to just wish them well. So this is a great little practice. If you did this every time you go into a meeting room, you know, or every time you get together with colleagues, it can really shift how your experience is with them, and it starts to habituate too, which is fantastic, and it can change your whole orientation to people. Okay, so we're just kind of wrapping up here. The great part about this is when you make a choice to shift more from just sort of default mode of being to autopilot, what have you, to being more aware in your life, it'll enhance your self-awareness and improve your emotional intelligence capacities. And by default, by virtue, as a result, you'll start to feel more connected and enhance your empathetic response to people. So this is a summary slide for you. And we have this really world that's getting more and more complicated, uncertain, ambiguous. So what to do about it? Well, emotional intelligence capacities can be really beneficial. And mindfulness, or becoming aware, moving from just not paying attention to paying attention, is really the key to it. And that allows us to create connection and empathy. But it is a practice. It is like going to the gym. You have to practice it to have those neurological changes in your brain and to improve, you know, the way your emotions relate to your logical center. So for that, it's useful to pick practices, either integrated practices, be mindful when you go for a walk, you know, sit for a few minutes every day, or these more integrated practices like a minute to arrive, or a 3-breath practice that are shift connection. So it can be all sorts of practices. You can find a lot of things online you can find to practice these sorts of things. So I mentioned a number of books throughout the talk, and I have another slide here with some books, and I think Erin will tell you how to get these slides. So Search Inside Yourself is a great book written by an engineer at Google. Funny, it's got cartoons, very easy to read. Some of these other ones are very nice books too. So I hope we left a little bit of time. I know I get excited and I want to talk a lot, but hopefully there's a little bit of time for some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ellen. And just as a reminder, we will be sending out a survey, and on that survey, there'll be a link to the complete PowerPoint slides. And then the webinar will actually be posted to our Career Lunch and Learn YouTube page 1 week from today. Okay, so we have lots of questions coming in. We have over 50, so we're going to get to as many as we can. Ellen, drawing from your own experiences working with clients, are you able to give us some examples where a heightened sense of emotional intelligence, perhaps someone that worked with you, learned these skills and was able to then apply it in a business situation where it helped improve relationships, or it helped someone arrive at a bit better business outcome? Just in your experience, what have you seen has had impact in the business place? If you're able to give a few examples, that would be great.
Oh, sure. And there's so many, you know, and I don't always see all the inner workings. So I see people when I make contact with them, but then I see them come back. There's one financial services company that lives in the north, or is headquartered in the North Bay area. And the head of the organization, it's not a real big organization, maybe 30 people. He keeps sending his teams to these Search Inside Yourself programs. And the teams come and they're very excited. I think they have new energy. He reports higher success. So it's a little bit hard to get your hands on, but there's just some sort of magic or creativity where solutions are more easily accessed, I think, in human beings and then in the team environment, and the teams work very well together that way. I just did a Search Inside Yourself program at a hospital, and this hospital, it was really interesting. They've been under a lot of stress. They lost accreditation for one of their departments. They actually had a couple of surgeons that had committed suicide. So the morale was very low. The doctors are very overworked. It's a county hospital, so the funding's tight. And the doctors come in saying, how can I even do this? Because I have to just pay attention to so many things. How can I be focused on something? But they found that the awareness even helps them manage all the stimuli, and it helped them congeal much better as a group. And even though the surgeons and the residents and the doctors and the administrators had all kind of had these little battles going on, they got very clear about their role, which was to serve anybody who needs service in this kind of low-income county hospital situation. And they just sort of, I think their sense of resilience and aliveness grew a lot. And again, it's not always easy to put your finger on why, you know, A led to B and B led to C, but just people kind of come alive, light up, and come up with solutions to situations that they didn't think there were solutions to.
Thank you. For viewers listening today that they're excited about this presentation, they've learned some great skills that they think could really benefit their colleagues and teams back in the workplace. Can you recommend a strategy on how to sort of introduce these topics in a business setting for folks that may want to, bring this up at their next staff meeting, or just even with colleagues one-on-one? What's your best advice there?
It's a great question, and I think there is a booby trap to avoid, and that's the kind of one where it's like when you tell your friend that you think they need therapy, and it doesn't always land so well. So that's the way to not do it, is not to go around telling all your colleagues that you think they need emotional intelligence. But one of the best ways is to just start practicing it yourself. And there are these great little mini things you can do. Show up to a meeting and invite everybody to just take a minute to take a breath. And you don't have to do it in a real weird way. You can just do it like, oh my gosh, is everybody as busy as I am? Let's just take a minute to take a breath and start. And I've known whole organizations that have implemented that practice across the organization. So it doesn't feel weird. It's just something they start doing like you would do anything else, like you brush your teeth in the morning. So probably the biggest one is lead by example. But of course, if you want ideas on how to do some of these things, both the Search Inside Yourself book and the Daniel Goleman books are great ones for practices you can start doing yourself. And then of course, there always is the world out there that's waiting to help you. So Search Inside Yourself is a great organization, or there are lots of practitioners that would come and give you some guidance about it.
Okay. To play devil's advocate a little bit, can someone have too much empathy? Have you seen that? And how can that perhaps actually have the reverse effect and cloud your awareness? Or what does that look like perhaps?
Well, I think it's useful to distinguish some things. So I mentioned the situation called emotional contagion. So if you, because we're hardwired as human beings to feel what another feels, if you do that, but you don't maintain a clear distinction of who you are and how you feel, then it's easy to feel bad. And a lot of care providers have this, first responders have this. I noticed this with my son when I was raising him, that he'd forget to do his homework and I would feel bad, and it doesn't work out very well if you get caught up in their feelings. There's a whole body of work around compassion and the distinction between empathy and compassion. And when we operate from a place of commitment to another human being, we can be empathetic with them, but it activates a whole different circuitry in our brain that lets us, different chemicals are released. You even get dopamine and other soothing sorts of experiences, and you can have an experience of happiness instead of suffering. So I think it's important to really do the work and try to do the practices, because if you start doing these things like offering kindness, it does trigger those parts of your brain that make you feel healthy, even if somebody else is suffering. So I think under an emotional contagion situation, yes, it can mess you up. There's a fella, he's been coined the happiest man in the world. His name is Mathieu Ricard. He was a biochemist. He's French. I don't remember where he went to university, but I think it was in Europe. But then he became a Buddhist monk. And they measured his brain. They did some of this research on him, and they found that the happy centers in the brain, his are the more developed than anybody he's ever met. And he talks about the situation where they put him in a brain scanner and showed him a picture of a woman suffering, but he registered happy in his brain. And they pulled him out and they said, well, what's up? How come you're not bothered? And he said, well, when I saw that picture, I started practicing compassion for that person, because it doesn't help me to feel bad. Just imagine like a mother and a child. If the child's screaming and yelling, it doesn't help for the mother to start screaming and yelling too. The mother really has to be the soothing person. So if you don't have practice at these things, and you don't know really how to come at it, if you don't come at it with a sense of kindness and commitment to the person, then you can be dragged down. But I would say if you come at it from the right perspective or commitment, that your tendency will be much more clearer than cloudy.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. It's kind of a two-part question. Is there, in terms of being self-aware, is there a tool that you've seen or used where you can measure your own EQ as well as your own mindfulness? And then a follow-up to that is there a certain time of day or certain environment that lends itself to creating a better environment to exercise emotional intelligence and mindfulness?
They sound very different questions, but let me take the first, and you might have to remind me of the second when I get there. Yeah. I don't know if this is exactly on point to the question, but what came to mind when you're asking the question is there's a practice called a body scan. And you can find these online. I mean, there are all sorts of fantastic resources online where you can find guided meditations and guided this and that, and there are guided body scans. But basically, you just move your attention through different parts of your body. The top of your head, the back of your neck, your face, your jaw, your eyes. And you start to notice whether things are relaxed or tight. And you can use that information, and ask yourself, well, what's going on? If your stomach feels tight, are you nervous about something? And sometimes when we do those in our groups, people that have never done them, they might not even be able to feel their arm or feel their toes. They're just not in tune with noticing their body. Or if we've had some things that are uncomfortable emotionally or physically, sometimes we sort of start to block out that part. We don't want to pay attention. But as you start these practices, you start to get more and more in tune. It's like, oh, I have this little thing today. What's up with that? So I don't know if there's technology that can measure, your attunement, your self-awareness, but certainly you can become your own barometer. What am I noticing today? Oh, I noticed something today I didn't notice before. Or I'm able to notice these things and not be like taken back by it. Like I know when I first started meditating, I didn't really want to pay attention because I'd get stressed out that I was stressed out. Sounds weird, but so you develop those capacities. And so I'd say you're your own good technology with respect to your level of self-awareness. The second question, can you remind me of the second?
Yeah, the second question was just, how do you know what time of day or what's the best, environment to practice mindfulness?
Okay, well, here's the answer that my teacher always tells me. The best practice to do for mindfulness and emotional awareness, the best time to practice is the one you'll do and the time you'll do it. So if you're a morning person, practice in the morning. If you're not a morning person, don't make yourself get up at 4:30 in the morning. Just experiment and see what works. Maybe it's 5 minutes after you eat your lunch that you take a break. Some people, like Chad Meng Tang, the author of Search Inside Yourself, the fellow from Google, he sets his watch and it goes off at the top of the hour, and he takes a minute break and he monitors his breath for a few breaths. So just play around. There's so many practices out there now. Play around and see what works for you, and then do that one, because the one that works is going to be the best one for you. In the same way, the time of day that works is going to be the best time of day for you.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to try to fit in one or two more questions here. Here's one that just came in. If your job requires you to depend or rely on an individual that is not empathetic to your situation, how do you handle that? Any advice to motivate this person to help achieve your goals if they don't understand them or dismiss them?
Well, practice a lot of loving kindness towards the person. And there are other vehicles too. It just popped into my mind as this whole area called nonviolent communications. It probably depends what you're working on, but if you're working on something technical or complicated, maybe you could just recommend to the person that you apply some more rigorous communication techniques, like, okay, Joe, here's what I think. I think A, B, and C would be best for these reasons. What do you think? And then see if Joe can start to put some rigor into what he thinks. And then you can start getting that feedback between you. It's like almost a communication, and you could start out a communication exchange on information, but then you could move the conversation to a different layer. Well, why? Why do you think that to be the case? So just start to find something in common, maybe a commitment towards some output that you have, or some commitment you have in your work together, and try to put rigor into it, and really try to have exchanges with the person at a level that person might be comfortable with. There's a book called Difficult Conversations, which gives some aid about how to have conversations that are difficult with another person. And there might be some tips and techniques in there that would be helpful to somebody who is maybe kind of a reluctant participant, a resistant participant. But I think just keep trying, keep being in touch with your own commitment and your own compassion towards the person, and then see if something else opens up for you about what might be effective with that person, given where he or she is in their life at this moment.
Okay, great. So that does bring us about to the hour. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Yeah, I know there's a ton of questions we didn't get to. So we did get to as many as we could. And I will pass these questions along to Ellen. And I believe on the slide deck, Ellen, you had your contact information as well.
I do, so yeah, feel free to send me an email and I'll try to answer them. Silly Search Inside Yourself Leadership Organization. I put their website here. I put my website where I've kind of built this work into my energy consulting practice. You can see how that looks, but it's not all that interesting because it's kind of a flat representation. But yeah, feel free to reach out and I'll try to answer questions.
Great. Yeah. And again, Ellen's contact information is on the slide deck, which will go out as part of the survey. So thank you to all our alumni viewers for joining. Please, if you have feedback, take that survey. It's really brief, but we love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future topics, we also would love to hear those. And you can contact us here at the Alumni Association at alumnicareers@mit.edu. Ellen, thank you again, and thanks again to our alumni viewers.
Take care. My pleasure. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.